They pumped a neurotoxin into his veins designed to melt a nervous system in 60 seconds. The alien warlord chuckled, broadcasting his countdown across the ship's comms. But they didn't know about human adrenaline. They didn't know about Earth's evolutionary crucible. 3 minutes passed. He didn't drop. He picked up a crowbar. The Deep Space Research Station times Aegis, 7 times, was never meant to be a fortress. Nestled in the shadow of a gas giant on the edge of the Orion Spur, it was a joint venture, a beacon of scientific curiosity funded by a consortium of Earth's leading aerospace entities, utilizing structural designs originally pioneered by Lockheed Martin and retrofitted for deep gravity wells. It was a place of quiet contemplation, populated by physicists, astrobiologists, and engineers. Until the hull breached. The invaders did not announce themselves. They did not hail the station or demand surrender. They simply dropped out of faster-than-light travel, a jagged, predatory vessel that registered on the station's sensors only seconds before the kinetic harpoon struck. The impact shuddered through the titanium skeleton of the station, buckling bulkheads and instantly venting sections of the lower observation decks into the hard vacuum of space. In the command center, Captain William Thatcher gripped the edge of the central holotable, his knuckles white. The emergency lighting bathed the bridge in a harsh, pulsing crimson. "Report!" Thatcher barked, his voice cutting through the wailing sirens. "Hull breaches on decks 4, 7, and engineering," shouted Dr. Amelia Croft, the chief medical officer who had taken over the secondary sensor station when the primary tactical officer was concussed by the initial blast. "We have unauthorized boarding parties. Atmospheric pressure is holding, but the internal bulkheads have sealed. Captain, they're systematically moving toward the main reactor." "Engineering," Thatcher muttered, his blood running cold. "Get me Chief Reed on the comms, now." Deep in the bowels of the station, Chief Engineer Nathaniel Reed was already fighting a losing battle. The engineering bay was a sprawling cavern of humming conduits and plasma manifolds, dominating the lower third of Time's Aegis, 7. Reed, a broad-shouldered veteran of the asteroid mining fleets who grew up weathering the brutal, sub-zero winters of Anchorage, Alaska, was desperately trying to initiate a manual lockdown of the antimatter containment field. If the Boers took the reactor, they took the station. Sparks rained down as a plasma torch sliced through the primary blast door. Reed ducked behind a heavy diagnostic console, gripping a heavy-duty titanium spanner, a massive, brutal tool designed for ratcheting class, 4 conduit bolts. It was a poor substitute for a rifle, but there were no weapons on Time's Aegis 7. The blast door gave way with a deafening screech of tearing metal. Through the smoke stepped the invaders. They were bipedal, standing nearly 7 feet tall, clad in seamlessly integrated biomechanical armor that shifted and adapted to the lighting. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency. The galactic community had warned Earth about them, an aggressive, expansionist species that operated on pure, cold logic and biological supremacy. To them, humanity was just the newest, softest prey on the galactic block. Their commander stepped forward. His armor was adorned with the jagged, metallic trophies of a dozen conquered worlds. He carried a sleek, terrifyingly quiet kinetic rifle in one hand and a specialized sidearm in the other. Reed didn't wait. He lunged from behind the console, swinging the titanium spanner with every ounce of strength in his heavily muscled arms. The heavy metal tool connected with the closest soldier's helmet with a sickening times crack, shattering the composite visor and sending the towering alien crashing to the deck. But there were too many. Before Reed could pull his arm back for a second swing, the commander moved with a blur of unnatural speed. A backhand strike sent Reed flying across the room, his ribs protesting violently as he slammed into the main reactor housing. Dazed, Reed tried to push himself up, tasting copper in his mouth. The alien commander stood over him, the specialized sidearm leveled at Reed's chest. There was a sharp Times hiss, and a pressurized dart buried itself deep into the flesh of Reed's shoulder, punching right through his standard-issue jumpsuit. On the bridge, the main view screen flickered to life. The invaders had spliced into the station's internal communication network. The alien commander's helmet retracted, revealing a pale, angular face devoid of emotion. The translation matrix crackled to life, delivering the alien's words in a heavily synthesized, chillingly calm English. "Captain William Thatcher," the alien commander said, I have secured your power core. Your vessel belongs to the collective. Any further resistance will result in the immediate atmospheric venting of your crew. Thatcher stepped toward the screen, his eyes burning with helpless rage as he saw the live feed of the engineering bay. Nathaniel Reed was slumped against the reactor, clutching his shoulder, chest heaving. "What did you do to him?" Thatcher demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. The alien commander looked down at Reed, a cruel, almost pitying smirk crossing his features. "Your engineer was foolishly aggressive. I have administered a localized dose of times Xylar, 9. It is a neurological disintegrator. It is perfectly designed to overwhelm the central nervous system of any carbon-based life form, inducing total systemic collapse." The commander turned back to the camera, his eyes dead and unblinking. "Your human will die in exactly 3 minutes. The pain will be absolute. Consider it a demonstration of the futility of your defiance." The invaders laughed, a strange, clicking, guttural sound that echoed through the bridge. 3 minutes, Captain," the commander repeated. "Watch him expire. Then prepare your surrender." The transmission cut out, leaving only the silent security feed of the engineering bay. Thatcher stared at the screen, his stomach dropping. On the feed, Reed had slumped further, his head rolling back, his eyes squeezed shut in what looked like unimaginable agony. "Amelia," Thatcher said quietly, "tell me you can do something. Tell me you have an antitoxin." Dr. Croft was already at her console, her fingers flying across the holographic interface as she tapped into Reed's biometric telemetry transmitted from his subdermal vitals monitor. "Captain, I've never seen a chemical signature like this. It's aggressively binding to his neural receptors. It's tearing through his synaptic pathways." "How long?" Thatcher asked, his voice hollow. "The alien wasn't lying," she whispered, her eyes wide with horror as she watched the data stream. "At this rate of cellular degradation, he has less than 2 minutes." Down in the dim, pulsing light of the engineering bay, Nathaniel Reed felt the fire. It started at the injection site in his shoulder, a searing, localized heat that felt like someone had driven a molten railroad spike into his flesh. Within seconds, the heat raced up his neck and plunged into his chest, wrapping around his heart like a vice of liquid iron. The alien poison, Xylar, 9, was designed to violently sever the connection between the brain and the body, essentially short-circuiting the nervous system until the victims suffocated on their own paralyzing agony. For every other species in the known galaxy, whose biologies evolved on peaceful, low-gravity garden worlds, it was an infallible death sentence. But Earth was not a garden world. Earth was a high-gravity death world, a relentless crucible of natural selection, where survival meant fighting tooth and nail against predators, famine, and the environment itself. And humanity had evolved a biological failsafe, a chemical override designed to keep them alive in the most extreme, fatal circumstances. As the alien neurotoxin began to attack Reed's nervous system, his body perceived a catastrophic existential threat. The human brain, facing imminent shutdown, threw the ultimate panic switch. The sympathetic nervous system activated with terrifying violence. The adrenal glands, situated atop his kidneys, essentially detonated, flooding his bloodstream with a massive, unprecedented tidal wave of endogenous catecholamines, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. On the bridge, Dr. Croft gasped, stepping back from the medical monitor as if it had burned her. "What?" Thatcher asked sharply. "What's happening? Is he gone?" "Captain," Croft stammered, frantically recalibrating the sensors to ensure it wasn't a glitch. "His heart rate. It's at 210 beats per minute and climbing. His blood pressure is spiking off the chart. The toxin. The toxin is trying to paralyze his neuroreceptors, but his endocrine system is counter-attacking. It's dumping pure adrenaline, cortisol, and dopamine into his system in quantities that should induce cardiac arrest." "But he's not dying?" Thatcher pressed, his eyes glued to the security feed. "He's not dying," Croft said, her voice a mixture of awe and professional terror. "The alien poison is binding to the same receptors as his adrenaline. It's not shutting him down, Captain. It's creating a biochemical feedback loop." It's acting like the most powerful stimulant ever synthesized. His lactic acid buffering is resetting. His pain receptors are being forcibly overwritten by endorphins. In the engineering bay, the 3-minute mark passed. The alien commander, busy overriding the main reactor controls, didn't even bother to look back. He simply gestured to one of his heavily armored soldiers. Dispose of the carrion. Vent the remains through the airlock. The massive alien soldier nodded, stepping toward Reed's slumped body. It reached down, extending a heavy, armored hand to grab the human by the collar. Reed's eyes snapped open. They were completely bloodshot. The pupils dilated to the point where his irises were barely visible. The pain was entirely gone, replaced by a roaring, deafening static in his ears. The world had slowed down to a crawl. He could see the individual grooves on the alien's armored gauntlet. He could hear the micro-servos whining in the joints of the invader's suit. He felt a primal, explosive energy vibrating in his bones. A predatory inheritance passed down from ancestors who chased mammoths across the ice and fought off saber-toothed tigers with sharpened sticks. Before the alien soldier could close its grip, Reed moved. It wasn't the slow, clumsy movement of a dying man. It was a blur of raw, unadulterated kinetic violence. Reed's left hand shot out, grabbing the alien's thick wrist with a grip fueled by hysterical strength, the same biological phenomenon that allowed human mothers to lift 2-ton automobiles off trapped children. The alien soldier let out a confused grunt, attempting to pull its arm away, but the human's grip was like a steel vise. With a roar that tore from the very bottom of his lungs, Reed lunged upward. He drove his forehead squarely into the center of the alien's shattered visor, the same visor he had cracked earlier with the spanner. The composite glass completely gave way. Bone met alien flesh. The soldier staggered backward, emitting a shrill shriek of pain, dropping its kinetic rifle. The alien commander spun around, his eyes widening in a very un-alien display of shock. The human was supposed to be dead. Reed didn't hesitate. He grabbed the heavy titanium spanner from the deck, the weapon feeling impossibly light in his adrenaline-flooded grip. He vaulted over the diagnostic console with terrifying agility, closing the distance between himself and the disoriented soldier in a fraction of a second. He brought the heavy wrench down with devastating force, crushing the alien's unarmored skull. The soldier dropped, dead, before it hit the floor. Silence descended on the engineering bay, save for the steady hum of the reactor and the heavy, ragged breathing of the human engineer. Reed stood over the corpse, his jumpsuit stained with his own blood and the dark, viscous fluids of the alien. He slowly turned his head, locking his wildly dilated eyes on the alien commander. He reached up to his shoulder, gripped the feathered end of the neurotoxin dart, and ripped it out of his flesh, tossing it onto the metal grating with a Times clink. "Is that all you got?" Reed growled, his voice a low, terrifying rasp that reverberated through the bay. The alien commander took a half-step backward, a fundamental biological instinct of self-preservation screaming in his brain. The logic of the universe had just been shattered. A fatal neurotoxin had just turned a soft-skinned civilian into an apex predator. Without a word, the commander raised his rifle and opened fire, unleashing a hail of hyper-accelerated kinetic slugs. But Reed was already gone. He dove into the maze of heavy coolant pipes and maintenance trenches beneath the reactor floor, vanishing into the shadows of his own domain. On the bridge, Thatcher let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He looked at Croft, a grim, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "Amelia," Thatcher said quietly, "kill the internal lighting in the lower decks. Drop the environmental temperature in engineering to -10 degrees Celsius. Let's make our guest feel at home." The engineering sector of Time's Aegis 7 times plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. A second later, the heavy ventilation fans roared to life, violently cycling the warm, breathable air out of the lower decks and replacing it with the ambient, frigid chill of the station's outer cooling systems. Frost began to immediately crystallize on the titanium bulkheads. For the alien invaders, whose biology required strict thermal regulation and who relied heavily on their advanced optical sensors, the sudden change in environment was highly disorienting. The commander switched his helmet to thermal imaging, scanning the dense jungle of pipes and conduits. But the thermal imaging was useless. The massive fusion reactor bled ambient heat everywhere, masking any subtle organic signatures. The alien commander barked orders in his native tongue, his voice carrying an edge of panic that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. 4 more heavily armed soldiers dropped down from the breached blast doors, forming a defensive perimeter around the reactor core. They were elite shock troops, conquerors of a dozen systems. But right now, they were being hunted by a heavily caffeinated primate with a wrench. Deep in the maintenance crawl spaces, Nathaniel Reed felt the temperature plummet. His breath plumed in the frigid air, but he barely registered the cold. The cocktail of adrenaline, cortisol, and the alien toxin coursing through his veins made his skin feel like it was humming with electricity. His body was burning calories at an astronomical rate, generating its own fierce internal heat. The freezing environment was actually keeping him from overheating. He knew every inch of this ship. He had built half these subsystems with his own hands. He knew the blind spots. He knew the acoustic anomalies. Reed crept along the graded catwalk suspended above the main coolant reservoir. Below him, 2 of the alien soldiers were moving in a tight formation, their kinetic rifles raised, sweeping the area. They moved stiffly. The sudden drop in temperature was clearly affecting their joint mobility. Humans, adapted to survive ice ages, barely considered this a chilly winter morning. Reed reached into a nearby tool locker and pulled out a heavy industrial plasma welder. It was designed to fuse starship armor plating, operating at temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees. He quietly bypassed the safety interlocks, turning the tool into an improvised, short-range flamethrower. He waited, holding his breath, listening to the heavy footsteps on the deck below. 3, 2, 1. Reed dropped from the catwalk. He landed squarely on the shoulders of the trailing alien soldier, his heavy magnetic boots crushing the invader to the floor with a sickening crunch. Before the lead soldier could spin around and acquire a target, Reed squeezed the trigger of the plasma welder. A blinding, roaring torrent of blue-white fire erupted from the nozzle, engulfing the alien's chest plate. The advanced bioarmor, designed to stop kinetic rounds and dissipate laser fire, simply melted under the sustained, close-range industrial heat. The soldier let out a horrific screech as the plasma burned straight through its life support systems, collapsing in a smoldering heap. Reed didn't pause to admire his work. He scrambled sideways, diving behind a massive, humming power converter just as a barrage of kinetic slugs tore through the space he had occupied a fraction of a second prior. "Commander!" one of the remaining soldiers shouted over the comms, its voice trembling. "We have lost Unit 4 and Unit 7! The human! It is not acting like a biological organism. It is too fast." Up on the bridge, Captain Thatcher and Dr. Croft were monitoring the localized telemetry. Croft was shaking her head in disbelief. "Captain, Reed's core temperature is elevating, but his stamina isn't depleting," Croft reported, tapping the screen. "The human body is designed for persistence hunting. We evolved to track prey for days until they collapsed from exhaustion. The aliens are sprinters. They rely on overwhelming shock and awe. Reed is turning this into an endurance hunt, and the alien toxin is entirely suppressing his fatigue poisons." Thatcher leaned into the comms unit. He knew the aliens were still monitoring the channel. It was time for psychological warfare. "Attention, alien boarding party," Thatcher's voice echoed through the dark, freezing corridors of the engineering bay. "This is Captain Thatcher. By now, you've realized your biological weapon has failed. You see, on Earth, we don't succumb to neurotoxins so easily. Our biology thrives on conflict. What you injected into my chief engineer didn't kill him. You just took off his leash." In the engineering bay, the alien commander listened to the broadcast, a cold dread pooling in his primary stomach. He looked around the cavernous, shadowy room. His tactical overlays were failing. The temperature was dropping. 2 of his best men were dead, butchered by a creature that was supposed to be biologically incapable of surviving the last 10 minutes. Clang! A heavy, metallic sound echoed from the far side of the room. The commander spun around, leveling his rifle. "Nothing!" Clang! Clang! It was coming from the ventilation shafts, a slow, rhythmic, terrifying sound. the sound of a heavy titanium spanner being dragged against a steel grate. "Group together!" The commander ordered his remaining 2 men, his voice cracking. "Cover all angles. Do not let it separate us." They stood back to back near the reactor control console, their rifles trembling slightly in their hands. The logic that dictated their military doctrine was unraveling. The universe was supposed to be orderly. Predators killed prey. Poison killed targets. This defied all known physics and biology. Suddenly, the massive industrial overhead lights directly above them shattered, plunged into darkness as Reed used a remote diagnostic tablet to overload the specific power junctions. "Fire! Suppressive fire!" the commander screamed. The aliens opened up, firing blindly into the darkness. Sparks showered the room as kinetic slugs ricocheted off reinforced bulkheads and coolant pipes. They fired until their weapons clicked empty, the silence that followed deafening, punctuated only by their own ragged, panicked breathing. "Did we get it?" one of the soldiers whispered, peering into the gloom. A shadow detached itself from the ceiling directly above them. Reed had climbed the magnetic crane rails during the gunfire. He dropped like a stone, the heavy spanner swinging in a lethal arc. It caught the whispering soldier on the side of the helmet, snapping its neck instantly. Reed hit the ground rolling, grabbing the dead alien's kinetic rifle as he stood up, and immediately jammed the barrel into the torso of the second soldier, pulling the trigger. The recoil bruised his ribs, but the alien was blown backward, crashing into a console. The commander was alone. He backed away, his hands shaking, his weapons empty. Out of the swirling frost and shadows, Nathaniel Reed stepped forward. The human was a terrifying sight. His jumpsuit was torn and stained. His face was covered in a mixture of grease, frost, and blood. But his eyes, those hyperdilated, terrifyingly focused eyes, were locked onto the commander with the predatory intensity of a wolf cornering a wounded deer. "You said 3 minutes," Reed whispered, his voice echoing in the freezing bay. He hefted the heavy spanner, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "It's been 10. The alien commander did not fight. The meticulous, predatory logic that had driven his species to conquer a dozen star systems calculated the odds of survival against the blood-soaked human advancing through the frost. The probability was 0. For the first time in his long, ruthless military career, the commander experienced a uniquely mammalian phenomenon he had no biological context for: blind, irrational panic. He turned and ran. His heavy boots pounded against the frozen deck plating of the engineering bay as he bolted toward the breached blast door. Behind him, he heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of Nathaniel Reed's pursuit. It was the sound of an apex predator running down exhausted prey. In the early 20th century on Earth, a Harvard physiologist named Walter Bradford Cannon first described the acute stress response in animals, coining the term fight or flight. For the alien vanguard, whose evolutionary history lacked natural predators, there was no biological equivalent. Their nervous systems were designed for calculated aggression or logical surrender. They did not have the physiological hardware to handle sheer adrenaline-fueled desperation. Reed caught him just as the commander reached the threshold of the engineering bay. The human didn't use the spanner. He dropped it, launching himself through the freezing air and tackling the 7-foot-tall warlord around the waist. The sheer kinetic momentum of a 200-pound human moving at sprint speed sent both of them crashing hard into the corridor's bulkheads. The alien's armor sparked against the titanium walls. "Captain," Dr. Amelia Croft's voice crackled over the bridge's main speakers, her tone a mix of scientific fascination and raw shock. "Reed's biometrics are stabilizing at the elevated threshold. The times Xylar, 9 times toxin, has fully bonded with his epinephrine receptors. It's not acting as a poison anymore. It's acting as a synthetic catalyst. It has permanently locked his central nervous system into a state of hyper-arousal." Captain William Thatcher stared at the tactical display. The primary engineering deck was secure, but the alien dreadnought hovering outside the station had realized their commander was MIA. The external sensors flared red. "They're deploying the second wave," Thatcher announced, his voice tight. 50 hostiles, breaching through the primary airlocks on decks 4 and 5. They're coming to salvage their pride. Down in the corridor, Reed had pinned the alien commander beneath him. The invader gasped for air, his primary lung punctured by his own shattered breastplate during the tackle. Reed loomed over him, his breath pluming in the cold air, eyes still wide and black with dilated fury. The commander reached up with a trembling, unarmored hand, a gesture of universal surrender. Reed grabbed the alien's wrist, his grip unyielding. He leaned in close, his face inches from the commander's terrified, angular features. He tapped the communication module integrated into the alien's collar. "Open a channel to your ship," Reed growled. The commander, paralyzed by the sheer predatory gravity of the human's presence, complied. The comms unit clicked, connecting directly to the bridge of the alien dreadnought outside. "Listen to me very carefully," Reed said, his raspy voice broadcasting across the enemy frequency. "You brought a biological weapon to a kinetic fight. You injected me with something designed to shut down my nervous system. But my species evolved on a rock where the air freezes, the ground shakes, and the predators hunt in the dark. We are the apocalypse you were never prepared for." Reed paused, staring dead into the alien commander's eyes before looking up toward the ceiling, as if staring directly at the enemy vessel through the hull. "You have 50 men stepping onto Deck 4. If they do not turn around in exactly 60 seconds, I will not just kill them. I will take this ship, I will cross your boarding umbilicals, and I will rip your engines out with my bare hands. The clock is ticking." On the bridge of Time's Aegis, 7, Thatcher didn't wait to see if the aliens would call the bluff. He keyed the station-wide intercom. "Attention all remaining crew." Thatcher's voice rang out, steady and commanding. "Chief Reed has secured engineering and neutralized the enemy command unit. The invaders are not invincible. They are highly susceptible to cold, to blunt force, and to fear. We are not soldiers, but this is our station. Dr. Croft, unlock the heavy equipment lockers. I want every automated cargo loader, every piece of industrial mining gear, and every plasma torch mobilized. We fight now." The response was immediate. The scientists, technicians, and mechanics of Time's Aegis 7 times were not military, but they were engineers. They understood physics, leverage, and volatile material. In the cargo bays, technicians hot-wired industrial exosuits manufactured by Caterpillar Inc., originally designed to lift 3-ton crates of titanium ore. The massive hydraulic arms, usually equipped with magnetic clamps, were terrifying improvised weapons. On Deck 4, the 50 alien shock troops advanced cautiously. Their HUDs were flooded with contradictory data. Their commander was taken. The biological weapon was ineffective. The silence of the station was deafening. Suddenly, the heavy blast doors at the end of the main concourse slid open. Standing in the doorway was not a squad of armed soldiers, but 3 massive, yellow-painted industrial cargo loaders. The human operators sat securely inside the reinforced roll cages, staring down the corridor. "Clear the deck!" one of the human technicians shouted over the external speakers, slamming the hydraulic throttles forward. The 3 mechs surged down the corridor, their heavy metallic treads chewing up the deck plating. The alien soldiers opened fire, their kinetic slugs sparking harmlessly off the 3-inch thick composite armor of the industrial machines. The leading loader simply plowed into the vanguard of the alien formation, its massive steel clamps crushing armor, bone, and morale in a single devastating sweep. Panic, once introduced into the alien ranks, spread like a highly contagious pathogen. The highly disciplined shock troops broke formation, scrambling to fall back to the airlock. But behind them, dropping from the ventilation shafts, came Nathaniel Reed. He had bypassed the main corridors, crawling through the maintenance arteries of the station with terrifying speed. He was armed with 2 heavy plasma torches, their blue-white flames hissing violently in the oxygen-rich air. He landed behind the retreating alien line, a demon forged in a high-gravity crucible and tempered by their own poison. He didn't say a word as he waded into them. 6 hours. That was how long it took to fundamentally rewrite the geopolitical hierarchy of the Orion Spur. The main tactical screen on the bridge of the alien dreadnought was a mosaic of catastrophic failures. The biometric telemetry of their elite boarding parties was winking out one by one. Out of the 50 soldiers sent in the second wave, 34 were confirmed dead, crushed by repurposed mining equipment, immolated by industrial plasma cutters, or bludgeoned in the dark by the hyperkinetic human engineer. The remaining 16 were trapped in a reinforced storage bay on Deck 5, frantically welding the doors shut from the inside to keep the humans out. The alien admiral, a veteran of the Centauri campaigns, stared at the localized feed with a sickening feeling of existential dread pooling in his gut. The being on the screen, Nathaniel Reed, was standing outside the sealed storage bay doors. The human had been fighting continuously for 6 hours. By all known metrics of galactic biology, the massive accumulation of lactic acid, the severe physical trauma, and the sheer metabolic exhaustion should have induced total organ failure hours ago. Yet, the human was currently using a heavy hydraulic strut to rhythmically pound against the reinforced door, methodically attempting to breach it. "Admiral," the dreadnought's tactical officer whispered, his synthesized voice trembling. "The human communication array is active. They are not transmitting a distress signal." "What are they broadcasting?" the admiral demanded, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "Everything," the officer replied. "They have tapped into the galactic extranet. They are broadcasting raw security footage of the entire engagement. The commander's death. The routing of the second wave. The human engineer's survival of the times, Xylar, 9 times injection. It is being viewed by thousands of star systems. Our reputation." The admiral's blood ran cold. His species ruled through the absolute certainty of their biological and technological supremacy. If the galaxy saw them being systematically slaughtered by a species of soft-skinned, unarmored scientists using hand tools and cargo loaders, their empire would face immediate, localized rebellions on a dozen occupied worlds. "Prime the main orbital kinetic bombardiers," the admiral ordered, his voice echoing with desperate malice. "We will vaporize the station. We will claim it was a catastrophic reactor failure. Leave no trace of these creatures." "Admiral, wait!" the tactical officer interrupted, his digits flying across the console. "The station's commander is hailing us directly." The main screen shifted, replacing the terrifying visage of Nathaniel Reed with the calm, bloodied, but composed face of Captain Thatcher. "Admiral," Thatcher said smoothly, leaning against the holotable on his bridge, "I see your weapon systems are powering up. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Your resistance is a statistical anomaly. Human," the admiral spat, trying to maintain his authority. "You are an inferior species. I am erasing this embarrassment from the cosmos." "I figured you might try that," Thatcher replied, a grim smile playing on his lips. "That's why 10 minutes ago, my chief engineer managed to breach the external airlock on Deck 5. He's not banging on that storage bay door to get in. He's banging on it to keep your men distracted." The admiral froze. "What are you talking about?" "Dr. Croft, bring up the external camera feed on the boarding umbilical," Thatcher ordered. A small window appeared in the corner of the admiral's screen. It showed the massive, flexible boarding tube connecting the dreadnought to Time's Aegis 7. And there, climbing along the outside times of the tube, in a hastily donned, heavily damaged EVA suit, was Nathaniel Reed. He was carrying a massive, shaped mining charge, the kind used to crack open iron-rich asteroids. He was heading straight for the dreadnought's primary atmospheric intake valves. "He's been pumped full of the most potent synthetic stimulant in the galaxy for 6 hours, Thatcher said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "He is very tired, very angry, and he has a bomb. If you fire on this station, he breaches your hull and introduces your bridge crew to the vacuum of space. And since we are broadcasting this entire feed live to the galactic net, your superiors will watch you die at the hands of a mechanic." The bridge of the dreadnought descended into absolute, suffocating silence. The admiral looked at the feed. The human was only meters away from their hull. The logic was inescapable. The math was final. "Cut the umbilical," the admiral ordered, his voice hollow, stripped of all its former arrogance. "Disengage docking clamps. Spool up the FTL drive." "But Admiral," the tactical officer protested. "Our men in the storage bay. We would be abandoning them to the humans." "Cut the umbilical!" the admiral roared. With a violent shudder, the massive alien dreadnought forcibly detached from Time's Aegis 7, tearing the boarding tube in half. The ship's engines flared with blinding blue light, and within seconds the massive vessel vanished into the distortion of a faster-than-light jump, running away from a deep space research station and a single, exhausted engineer. On the hull of the station, watching the dreadnought flee into the void, Nathaniel Reed slowly lowered the heavy mining charge. He let out a long, ragged breath that fogged the inside of his EVA helmet. The roaring static in his ears, which had sustained him for 6 brutal hours, finally began to fade. The alien toxin had burned itself out. The crash hit him like a freight train. His knees buckled, the sheer crushing weight of his physical trauma finally registering in his brain. His heart rate plummeted from its astronomical high, and darkness crept into the edges of his vision. "Reed? Reed, do you copy?" Thatcher's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Yeah, Cap," Reed whispered, slumping against the cold titanium hull of the station. "They're gone. Can someone come get me? I think I need to sit down." 3 days later, Nathaniel Reed woke up in the station's reinforced medical bay. The lights were dimmed. He was hooked up to a half-dozen intravenous lines, pumping highly advanced synthetic nutrients and muscle relaxants into his battered body. Standing at the foot of his bed, holding a datapad, was Dr. Amelia Croft. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Chief," she said, a warm, relieved smile breaking across her face. Reed groaned, trying to sit up, but every single muscle fiber in his body screamed in protest. "Felt like I went 10 rounds with a freight hauler. How long was I out?" 72 hours, Croft replied, tapping the pad. "Your body essentially forced itself into a microcoma to repair the cellular damage. The sheer amount of endogenous catecholamines in your system would have vaporized the heart of any other species in the known universe. As it stands, you've suffered severe micro tears in your muscle tissue, minor thermal burns, and severe dehydration." "But I'm alive," Reed rasped, offering a weak grin. "You are," Thatcher said, walking into the medical bay, his uniform crisp, looking more like a military general than a science director. He walked over and placed a hand on Reed's shoulder, the opposite shoulder from the dart wound. "You did it, Nathaniel. You saved the station. You saved all of us." "What about the Krell? The invaders?" Reed asked. "Are they coming back?" Thatcher chuckled, shaking his head. "No, they aren't coming back. Because of your little broadcast, the entire galactic community just realized that humanity's biological failsafes make us the most dangerous creatures in the Orion Spur. The aliens classified Earth as a class, 4 Death World, and put a permanent 100 light-year quarantine zone around our system." Thatcher leaned in, his smile widening. "They're terrified of us, Reed. They pumped you full of poison, laughed at you, and told you that you were going to die in minutes." Reed closed his eyes, sinking back into the soft medical gel foam of the bed, the faint memory of the freezing engineering bay drifting through his mind. 6 hours later, Reed whispered, a rough, satisfied chuckle escaping his lips. "They were running. If you felt the adrenaline pumping through this incredible story of human resilience and defiance, don't let it end here. Smash that like button to show the galaxy what humanity is made of, share this video with your fellow Deathworlders, and subscribe to the channel for more epic, pulse-pounding sci-fi HFY stories every week. Drop a comment below on what alien threat we should face next, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an adventure.
Hi, my name is Tran Trung, the owner-manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, "Your human will die in minutes, the aliens laughed, 6 hours later they were running, _HFY, I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the feeling of determination under impossible odds. Watching one person refuse to give up, even when everyone expected the worst, is a reminder that resilience often shows up one decision at a time instead of all at once. Which moment made the biggest impression on you, and why? Do you think the aliens underestimated human endurance, or was it the willingness to keep fighting that truly changed everything? One lesson I like to take from stories like this is to stay steady when life gets difficult and not assume the first setback decides the ending. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy HFY adventures like this, feel free to like the video or subscribe to Palace Truths for more stories.